I was out of town last summer. I came back in early August to discover what had happened here, and I was soon assigned to look into it and to sort of decide what could be done to deal with what was happening at City College. And the result of that, it's too loud now, is this 280-page complaint that was filed on April 30th, along with 870 pages of attached evidence, although we cited to a lot more evidence beyond that. This complaint is not brought by me, it is not brought by any individual. It is brought by the California Federation of Teachers and AFT Local 2121. The CFT represents 100,000 people. The number of unions that the CFT has negotiated contracts for in the community colleges is truly astounding. And this complaint was supported by evidence provided to us by sources from around the state, people who have followed with great concern what the commission has done, not only to City College, but also to other entities. So the CFT is supremely qualified to have brought this complaint. I think altogether the CFT has far more experience than the Accrediting Commission does on matters of education. The second question that I noticed was asked was, well, what is the source of your evidence? Well, the source of the evidence is mostly in the public domain. If you read, if you're able to make it through the 280-page complaint that we filed, virtually all of that evidence is found online in websites that include accreditation reports. Because what we tried to do was to look at the Accreditation Commission in light of the 10 to 12 federal regulations that they are required to satisfy and their own policies. So what we tried to do today, sorry about that, was to focus on the three primary areas I think that you can generically apply to this complaint. And number one is the lack of transparency by the Accrediting Commission, which is really quite remarkable. The second thing is their accountability, which I think they are not very accountable for their actions. And the third thing is fairness. And people often say about the Accrediting Commission, well, don't they have to follow due process? And the Accrediting Commission says, no, we don't have to follow due process because we're a private entity. They serve a public purpose. They serve a governmental function. If you look at California law, whether you're a private entity or a public entity, some form of due process has to apply to you. And if you talk about purely private entities, they also must have a form of due process. It's called common law fair procedure. And the federal government and the federal courts have recognized this as well. When City College went from being fully accredited, as it had been for its entire existence, to show cause, the verge of disaccreditation, I carefully examined, along with people in the CFT and the AFT 2121, how this had occurred. And the first thing is that the way the commission operates is that they have these 19 or so commissioners who are appointed, and eventually they have their standards measured by visiting teams of supposedly peers and educators who come to the college for 2 or 3 days, and sometimes 4, and examine the college based on these various standards and criteria, and issue a report. And so painstakingly, Tracy and another law clerk went through every single report for the last 6 years, and most for the 5 or 6 years before that, and created a database of every single person who was on these teams. Wow. And we then categorized them based upon how they were representative of the constituency of colleges. So the first thing we looked at was, well, faculty. Faculty represents 75% of the employees. Well, how many of the team members are faculty? 15%. There's just a complete disparity. Administrators represent 4% of the employees of the community colleges. How many people on these teams are administrators? 75%. Of the last 2,500 evaluators, 75% are administrators. This is completely out of sync. So we also looked at how the process worked. And the evaluation team comes in, they get a lot of information. And what they are given is copies of the previous evaluation reports, the self-study, various interim reports, responses and letters from the commission. They read that and then they head out across the campus and interview people. And there's a very detailed schedule for how they do this, and I've seen these schedules, and you can find those online too, by the way. And they create two sets of recommendations. One is a recommendation for various standards. You know, how if they are not meeting one, there's a deficiency. If they're meeting the standard, but there's things they could do to improve, they're given recommendations. And they also make a recommendation for action. And there are like about 6 different types of action. There's 3 types of accreditation, and then there's the penalties: the warning, probation, show cause, and finally disaccreditation. So in the case of City College, that evaluation team had to do both of these jobs. They had to see, were there deficiencies or were there areas where they might improve and get suggestions or recommendations. And finally, they had to make a recommendation for action. Well, what was the recommendation that was made in the case of City College? You wouldn't know if you asked the commission, because they keep that secret. And the college wouldn't know because they're not told either. Now, when was the last time you went and saw a trial and the jury's recommendation for punishment or its verdict was kept secret? You know, I love looking at all of the presentations made by commission staff. Usually it's their president, sometimes it's one of the vice presidents. They've gotten a number of those in the last few years. And they always have the scales of justice up there, you know, the very famous scale of justice. And I'm wondering, why do they have the scale of justice up there when they won't tell you the verdict of the jury? In what society is the jury's verdict kept secret? And yet they are given an important public function, and that function is to assess whether or not a college should be accredited. This is to benefit not the commission. It is to benefit the college, and it is to benefit the students, and it is to benefit the public. Yet they don't do that. So was there such a recommendation in the case of City College? I would like to know. The report alleges that there is evidence that there was no recommendation given. If so, that would be the first time, I believe, in the entire history of this commission. It is an important point, and yet I cannot stand before you and say, yes, it was done, because we filed our complaint, 280 pages long. A month later, the commission responded to that complaint. Has anybody here read their response, by the way? Raise your hands if you have. Okay. It takes a lot less time than reading ours. It's only 7 pages long, and it doesn't say very much, and it doesn't answer that question. One of the things that I was fascinated by in the course of this investigation were comments by the president, which I thought were relevant to how the commission does its job. And so, and in particular, I focused on 3 or 4, and I didn't really want to focus on a lot of those because you get into those he said, she said things, and I didn't want to do that. I preferred to focus on something like this meeting at the College of the Redwoods in 2012. It was announced as a public meeting. They had just been placed on show cause. Okay. I should mention right now, I'm the lawyer for the faculty union at the College of the Redwoods. I am not here today speaking on behalf of that union. I'm here speaking on behalf of the CFT and AFT 2121. But there was a public meeting. There were over 100 people at that meeting. At the beginning of the meeting, the president said that they would not be allowed to tape. You know, I have to say, I find this a little puzzling. It's a public meeting, but people can't tape. But it turned out that it was also streamed live. And streamed live, for those of you who know audiovisual stuff, it does get recorded. Okay? And one of the interesting things about this was that they were being placed on show cause status. They had been placed on show cause status, just like this. And the president of the commission made this comment and said that the commission would not tolerate again what had happened when Compton College was disaccredited. If they disaccredited the College of the Redwoods, all of the employees would be fired. The most they could get was unemployment. Somebody else would take it over and they could apply to work there. And the union contract, it's gone. Now this is the president of this commission, who is speaking on behalf of this commission. So you have to wonder, did this commission authorize her to say these things? Did they vote to have this position? Who's running this commission? Is it the president of that commission who's running the commission? Is it the commissioners? Where in the world did that comment come from? I thought it was interesting that the commission's president also said that their goal was to publicly shame a board, that this was the whole purpose of sanctions. And this was of interest to me, and we'll get to this in a moment, because a commission is required to respect the public policy of a state and the law. And in our investigation, we discovered that the commission was criticizing and sanctioning colleges for misbehavior by the governing boards. And in particular, one form of misbehavior was that board members had gone onto campus and talked to students. Now, think about that for a moment. You're elected by the public to represent the public, to serve the students, and you walk onto a campus and you talk to students as a board member to inform yourself. And what happens? Well, they're going to get dinged for that one. That shouldn't happen. And the reason is they have this philosophy. Their philosophy of the commission is an underground regulation, essentially. The board acts as one. And I suppose the origin of that is some old theory that we found. I forget the name of it. It's in our report. That, well, the board is a board, so they act as one. So it isn't that they just walk down the street and go to a restaurant and eat the same thing. They all vote as a board for action. But so one board member can't be the one who fires somebody or signs a contract or something like that. That's a long way from saying you all have to think alike and talk alike, because the commission said, and the president said it, why don't we go to the next slide for a second, said that all board members must support an action publicly or risk an accreditation ding. This is needed for harmony. So apparently harmony is a principal underground value of the commission, which raises that question, very uncomfortable question, why do they sow so much disharmony? And she says that if the board votes one way and a trustee disagrees, they have to give up that fight, or maybe being on a board is not the place for you. Now, okay, so I think back to the 1950s and 60s in California. There was a lot of racial discrimination, sex discrimination. Board members very frequently supported the status quo. Some people stood up and said, well, wait a second. You can't have this sort of discrimination going on. Under this theory, we would be back in another century. And yet, colleges are being dinged and they are being sanctioned because board members stand up. In one of the reports we found, and we read the letters from the commission, I'm certain they're going to sanitize them even more in the future. It actually said in this one report that the faculty could no longer speak to the board because one faculty member had said something that was improper. This is evidence. These statements that appear in writing, in their reports and in their letters, and that are referenced in the various documents the commission published, and are said at meetings of chief executive officers, chief business officers, the Community College League. This evidence tells you what is happening and why California sanctions its community colleges at almost 400 times the rate of any of the other commissions across the country. Until today, you could go to the commission website. Yeah, we have it. You could go to the commission website. Now, they said that because Barbara Binos was accused by the CFT complaint, AFT complaint, of improprieties, she would not be answering the complaint. She would be recused. Okay? But Mr. Kinsella, who was specifically alleged to have done certain improper things, presumably did answer the complaint, as did Mr. Gornick, who was also accused. So we'll get to that. But when we went to the to this, here's what it says. Complaint analysis drafted by BB. And can you go to the last one? Can you go backwards? Okay. And there, it said it up there too. Complaint drafted by BB. And it's up here at the top. It says, complaint analysis drafted by BB. And in my interviews, many people said, well, she does use BB all the time. And the only other BB I know is me, and I didn't write this. So it just isn't, I'm not accusing her of writing it. I'm not accusing them of lying when they say she was recused. I am wondering why it says complaint analysis drafted by BB. And I figured we'd have this, demonstration here, and you'd all go to it today. Well, guess what? Today it disappeared. If you go there today, it now just says Executive Committee report. So if we'd met yesterday, maybe we would have been able to do that. So the regulations are found in the Code of Federal Regulations. The authority to adopt regulations that the Commission must abide by was given to the Department of Education Secretary by the Higher Education Act of 1992. And it's crucial that you be accredited by one of the regional accrediting bodies, or you do not qualify for federal funds, and students do not qualify for federal loans. So accreditation is crucial. The first thing that was most striking about the review of City College in March of 2012 was that Barbara Binos' husband, the president's husband, was appointed to the site review team, the evaluation team. And just without discussing this in any detail, does that strike people as a little weird?
Yeah.
If you read through the regulations of the federal government and the Commission's own policies, it emphasizes that this evaluation team is supposed to be independent of the Commission. That is the hallmark. And they have to not only be independent in fact, they have to appear to be independent. There cannot be any conflicts of interest, actual or the appearance of a conflict. Now, did that team have any responsibility to review the work performed by Ms. Bino in connection with this college's accreditation? You're darn right it did. In 2006, this college was fully accredited, and it received a letter from Barbara Bino with some requirements. And one of those requirements was that they had to undergo a second period of sending a report in to talk about how they were addressing suggestions to improve. And they sent in the report, and guess what they got? They got a letter from Barbara Bino judging how the Commission felt they had done, as characterized by, written by, explained by Barbara Bino. The same thing happened in 2009 and again in 2010. There are 4 letters from Ms. Bino, and that visiting team was given all 4 letters, and Mr. Crabtree had to review the letters written by his wife and decide how to weigh them in the actions and recommendations he made in that investigation of City College. Is that a conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict of interest? I think it is. I don't see how it is anything but a conflict of interest. Now, the Commission said in their response that, well, in academia, there are a lot of people who are married to spouses who are also in academia. Well, how many presidents decide whether to fire their spouse? How many tenure committees get to evaluate their spouse? How many cafeteria workers are evaluated and directed by their spouse? How many police officers are supervised by their spouse? That was their defense to that. And the second thing they said is, well, he was only one of 17 evaluators. Well, at the same time, they said he was on there for his expertise. And in our complaint documents, which will be posted on the CFT website, all 900 pages are going up today or tomorrow. You can look at the evidence, and we have the schedule, and it shows all the things Mr. Crabtree did. He was no shrinking violet. He was given as much authority as the other most active commissioner, if you look at the number of interviews he did and that kind of thing. And I do find it interesting that they defended his appointment by saying, well, it was his expertise. He had been on one community college evaluation. I believe that was in 2002 at Mount San Jacinto. He'd done Brooks College in 2004, and he did some college out in the Pacifics, I think, in 2006 or 2008, something like that. That was it. I mean, that doesn't seem like a lot of expertise to me. And we're talking voc ed here. I mean, there are a lot of people who are in voc ed and can do evaluations of colleges. So, anyway, that's the first conflict. The second conflict I wanted to talk to you about is of interest, and that is because of AB 1456. And again, the commission is supposed to be this impartial evaluator. It reviews the report, issues its decisions. In the Student Success Task Force, regardless of one's position on that task force and its recommendations and the legislation, the fact of the matter is there were recommendations. Those recommendations were designed to change the mission of the community colleges. That would have directly affected the mission of this district. And what happened? Many of you went to a meeting in Sacramento, I think it was on January 9, 2012. And I saw it on YouTube. It was a really great meeting. Some of you were great. If Chantel is here, Chanel, fantastic presentation. Within 2 weeks, the ACCJC weighed in against what City College and its students were doing and opposed their position and supported the bill that you all were opposing. It's sort of like going into a courtroom in a fight between, let's say, the union and the district over the legitimacy of the contract, and the judge saying, to the district, hi, I'm glad I like what you're doing. I mean, this is really a no-brainer. I mean, it is an absolute no-brainer. This is a conflict of interest. It isn't just the appearance of one. This is an abject conflict of interest. And yet that commission was then looking into how you did your mission and how you implemented it when they were opposed to the mission. And they spent money, $3 million are given about each year by the community colleges to evaluate them. They spent that money to hire a lobbyist. They wrote letters to the legislature. They appear on the bills. Go to www.leginfo.ca.gov. You can look up all the reports. There's Barbara Binos' name and her position right there. It's conflict of interest. Community college employees get retiree health benefits. And why do you get retiree health benefits? Because it is the policy of the legislature that was adopted in the 1960s because you didn't get retirement health benefits unless your employer gave them to you. And the quid pro quo for these retiree benefits was lesser wages. So this is a big deal, having retiree health benefits. And then in the early 2000s, the Government Accounting Standards Board, a private organization of accountants, recommended that colleges and other public entities at least list on their website the total future value, present value of the future payment of these benefits. So just make sure you understand what I'm saying. Let's just take the next 30 years. There's going to be 2,000 teachers, let's say, working here, and maybe 600, 800 classified employees. I don't know the exact number, over the next 30 years each year. And they're going to pay wages. If they had to calculate how much money they would need to pay those wages over the next 30 years, I guarantee you it is a big number, a bigger number than I can come up with. That's what they're doing for retirement benefits. They're saying, well, what is the present amount you'd need to have to invest so that over the next 30 years you have enough money to pay this? Well, what that means in practice is that if you're going to pre-fund it, but put this money away in advance, sock it away, then you're going to have to pay a lot more than the pay-as-you-go cost. Well, this became an obsession of the commission. And we detail their obsession with this in about 40 pages. And what was interesting was this, that and I'll show it to you in the complaint. I think we have do we have a couple pages from the report? It will go back. Okay. So in 2005, the Community College League of California, which is a trade association of the school boards and their CEOs and administrators, created a retiree health benefit trust. They call it the Retiree Health Benefit JPA, the Joint Powers Authority. It's actually a governmental agency. It was created to accept money to pre-fund this. And they sent out this literature, this newsletter to all the colleges talking about how important it was to pre-fund it. And in red, they quoted from Barbara Bino and the commission, stating why they needed to pre-fund this benefit. So why don't we go back now for a second and we'll talk about some. Okay, so the JPA created a board of trustees. Its founder, one of the three founders, was Mr. Kinsella, who's the CEO at Gavilan College. Another one of the members of the JPA board was Mr. Gornick, and there are about another dozen. And these people, while serving on this JPA, receiving funds from these colleges that were pre-funding, were simultaneously working for the commission, either as commissioners or on their task force on financial affairs, where they were urging pre-funding or saying you should do it, or they were serving as the chair of teams. Mr. Kinsella served on 9 teams in this last 6 years, more than anybody, I think. And is that a conflict of interest?
Yes.
I mean, if you look at City College and why they got dinged, supposedly the finances were the big reason. I've heard that the commission doesn't agree with that, but if you read through things and you talk to people, that seems to be the big one. And the big part of that, it was mentioned in the letter in 2006, it was mentioned in 2007, it was mentioned in 2010, it was mentioned in 2012, was not pre-funding the retiree benefits. And here's where you get the big inconsistency. The public policy of the state of California is that you don't have to pre-fund the benefits. The state chancellor's office issued an advisory saying you don't have to pre-fund. Pay as you go is fine. How is Cal State Hayward doing it? How is Cal State doing it? Pay as you go. How does UC do it? It's pay as you go. So they're out of step. And then one of the other points, we looked at all of these rules. They are supposed to have regulations that are above board. They can't be underground. But this requirement that they pre-fund these benefits was below the board. It was an underground regulation. They also are supposed to have regulations, standards that are widely accepted by other accrediting bodies. There are 5 or 6 other major accrediting bodies, depending on how you define it, in the United States. One of them is their former partner commission, the Senior College Commission in California. Do any of them look at the OPEB GASB 45 requirement? No. It is a peculiarity of this commission.